There is another Sufi story that, at the same time as being an allegory, has clearly definable the levels of stories, that level of the moral or the teaching, that level of the sacred symbols and numbers and archetypes, and the level where is that unifying character or theme, as well as the secret that's contained in every story. And if we can experience and understand that all these three levels come together seamlessly in stories, we can perhaps accept that the three levels of mind or existence, that level of cause and effect or duality, that level of our dreams and our intuition and our creativity, and that level where we recognize the interrelatedness of life, can come together seamlessly in the moments of life to bring about a state of alert, attentive presence and awareness. This is a story about a king. Many stories have a king, and this king ruled over a great land. But in his kingdom there was a certain tailor who prided himself on the clothing that he created. But he was prideful, and he boasted a great deal about his abilities and the beauty of those things that he made. So one day the king called the tailor to him and invited him to walk out with him into the desert. Now, while they were walking in the desert, the king picked up a stone, and he said to the tailor, "I want you to make me a garment out of this stone. You have 3 days in which to do so." Now the tailor said, "How can I make a garment out of a stone?" And the king said, "If you do not do so, your head will be lopped." So the tailor went back to his home, lamenting to his family the task that had been given to him. And his wife and 2 of his 3 daughters wept with him, knowing that his fate would be to have his head lopped. But the 3rd daughter said, "Wait, father, wait. There is a way." And so she gave instructions to her father. And the next day he went off to the palace, seeking the presence of the king, carrying with him a little sack. Now when he came into the presence of the king, the tailor said, "Your garment I've already begun to prepare, and it's shaping up very well. But since you didn't give me the proper thread in which to sew it together, I've bought this bag of sand for you, so if you will make the thread, I will be able to finish your garment." So the king laughed, and he said, "Yes, well, your head will still rest on your shoulders, but that does not make you any less a fool. I know that you did not come up with this answer. Where did this answer come from?" So the tailor had to admit that it was his youngest daughter who had given him these instructions. "Well," said the king, "this is just the kind of being that I would want to have as my wife. How old is she?" And the tailor said, "Well, she is 15 years old." "Well," said the king, "bring her to my palace. I'm going to marry her." So, with great pomp and ceremony, a carriage was sent to the tailor's house, and the third daughter was brought to the palace, where a wedding took place. But there was no consummation of the marriage. The new wife, the third daughter, was placed in a rather palatial house which was nearby to the palace of the king, where she was left with the opulence of being provided for with gems and garments and all the trappings of being a king's wife. But the king was a lonely man, and he used to find his diversions in hunting and traveling far and wide, which he did very often. But when he was going out on a hunt, or when he was traveling, he would pass by the house of the young woman, and he would knock on the door and ask her how she was doing, to which she would respond, "I'm fine, thank you." And he would go off on one of his excursions. Now it so happened that it was found out by his young wife that he was going to visit a place in Armenia. And so, after the king left, she herself set out. And when she came to the place where the king had set up his tents, she also found a place nearby where she set up a tent. Now, she came out of her tent and unveiled. She paraded herself in front of the tent of the king. And it so happened that sitting outside the king's tent was his servant who was making his coffee. But seeing this beautiful maiden unveiled, instead of putting sugar in his coffee, he put salt. So when the king tasted his coffee and was going to lop off the head of his servant, the servant admitted that his attention had been diverted by this beautiful maiden who had walked by. So the king, intrigued by this, wanted to find out who this maiden was. So he sent off his servants and discovered that she was living just nearby in a tent. And when the servant approached her, she invited the king to her tent. Well, when he arrived at her tent, he was smitten by her beauty, and they spent 3 days and 3 nights in wonderful cohabitation. After the 3 nights, the young woman invited the king to a game of chess. And being so smitten by her beauty, she easily won the game. And as a prize for her winning, the king took off his finger a very, very beautiful ring and placed it on her hand as a gift. But that night, in the midst of the night, the young woman left and was not seen again. The king, being smitten, was rather sad at this loss, and he went back to his palace. And time again passed. He thought very often of this beautiful maiden, but she was nowhere to be found. So he again set out on another excursion, again passing by her door and knocking to ask after her well-being. And again his wife, when she found out where he was heading, went off to follow him and again set herself up nearby. Now, again, almost the same scenario happened, and the king was greatly surprised to meet again this beautiful being. And again they spent 3 days and 3 nights in blissful love-making. And again she disappeared. Again he bewailed his loss and returned to his palace. For a 3rd time, the same scenario occurred. The king going off on excursion, his wife, unbeknownst, following him. But when he returned for the 3rd time, not knowing where his beautiful companion was, 7 years passed, and in his loneliness he decided that he would give up his longing for this companion, and so he decided to take another bride from a neighboring kingdom. And the wedding was set up. But in the years that had passed, for on the 3 occasions when his young wife and he had come together, she had given birth to a child, 2 sons and a daughter. The 2 sons she named under those places where the cohabitation had taken place, and the 3rd daughter he gave another name. So on the day of the king's wedding, his wife invited his 3 children, because now, after each occasion, not only had she been given his ring, but she had been given a dagger encrusted with jewels and an embroidered bandana that he wore on his head. Each of these things she gave to her 3 children and told them to stand on the steps of the palace when the king emerged. When he did emerge to greet his new bride, who was expected at any moment, he saw the 3 children and asked what they were doing there. When they approached him, he saw that the eldest son was wearing his ring. The 2nd son had his jewel-encrusted dagger in his belt, and the girl was wearing the golden embroidered bandana. Immediately his interest was perked and asked, "From where did you obtain these?" And the eldest son explained that they were given by their mother. The king immediately asked to be brought to her, and when he did so, and she removed her veil, he found his love that he had longed for and missed, and discovered that she was none other than his bride of those years before. Needless to say, she found her rightful place by his side, and they lived happily, taking care of the kingdom which prospered under their union. This story that clearly contains the levels of stories, and as we find, they combine effortlessly and seamlessly. We can understand them if we are in that place where we can accept and understand that stories, all stories, fairy tales, folk tales, parables, all contain and are whole in the levels, and also contain the secret of all stories. We can perhaps accept, experience and understand that the three levels of life can and do come together effortlessly and seamlessly in our life, in the moments of life, to bring about a state of alert, presence, openness, awareness, free from those things that we have shut out the significance of our intuition and our dreams, the signs and symbols that all of life contains. What does this add up to for us? How would you define this state of alert, present awareness? What is it in your life? What does it equal? Every moment present, alert, aware, and something else. How would you describe it? Besides being alert, present and aware in the moments of life, what else is there? We find it now after listening to a story. We understand it and its levels without analyzing it. How does this equate to the moments of life where we have alert presence and awareness? How does this equate? What else is there for us? What have you found living in these intense moments?